Hello, friends. Today we embark on a thrilling journey through Norse mythology, a world of gods, heroes, and mythical creatures. Norse mythology isn't just a collection of ancient legends. It's an entire universe steeped in mystery, the harshness of northern nature, and epic battles of power. It captivates with its depth, uniqueness, and a richness of stories that remain relevant to this day. Norse mythology is shrouded in a mist of mystery. Much of our knowledge about it has come down to us through oral traditions, which centuries later were recorded in sources like the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. Yet, despite this, many details remain untold. For instance, what happened before the creation of the world? What was life like before the great battle of the gods, Ragnarok? These gaps leave ample room for imagination, inspiring creators. The Norse people believed their world was far more than just the land beneath their feet. Worlds are interconnected through Yggdrasil, the tree of life, whose roots and branches encompass all existence. And each of these worlds, Asgard, Midgard, or Jotunheim, holds its own secrets. Even the gods themselves, like Odin, the chief god, willing to sacrifice everything for knowledge, including his own eye. Isn't it intriguing why knowledge was more important to him than anything else? Norse mythology was born in conditions where survival was not just a task, but a genuine struggle. The harsh climate, cold winters, unforgiving landscapes, all of this left its mark on the worldview of the ancient Norse. Their myths are about trials and struggles, not only against enemies, but also against nature itself. Imagine the northern wind lashing your face, snow covering the land, and the endless night when it feels like the world has stopped. It is in such conditions that stories are born of heroes battling giants, monsters, and even their own destiny. This harshness makes the myths incredibly realistic and relatable, as life is depicted as it truly was, full of hardship, yet also full of heroic deeds. The scale of Norse myths is awe-inspiring. There are no minor details here. Every event matters to the entire universe. The battle between giants and gods isn't just a clash of two forces, it's a struggle that determines the fate of the world. Ragnarok isn't just an end, it's the final showdown, after which. The epic nature of the myths is evident in the heroes who perform unimaginable feats. Thor, battling giants with his hammer Mjolnir. Loki, the trickster, capable of turning the tide of events with sheer cunning. Or Heimdall, who guards the Bifrost Bridge, ready to be the first to face the enemy in the final hour. Each story unfolds against a backdrop of grand events. A dragon guarding immense treasures. The giant wolf Fenrir threatening the gods themselves. Or the world tree Yggdrasil, witnessing both the birth and death of the universe. These narratives encompass everything, from heroism to tragedy, from grandeur to catastrophe, and this makes them both majestic and profoundly human. We must not forget that Norse mythology is a reflection of the Viking Age and a glimpse into their view of the world and life. For the Vikings, who sailed the seas, fought for honor, and sought a path to Valhalla, mythology was not just tales. It was their religion, their philosophy, and their way of accepting and explaining everything that happened around them. These myths taught them to be strong, to embrace the challenge of fate, and not to fear death. For death was not an end, but merely a transition to another world. Valhalla awaited those who died heroically in battle, while for others there was Folkvang, ruled by the goddess Freya. Even after death, life continued, full of adventure and battles. Today, Norse mythology continues to inspire. It offers us the archetypes of true heroes, teaches us to overcome difficulties, and reminds us that behind every darkness lies a light. It is a legacy that connects us to the past, showing that despite all changes, human aspirations and dreams remain eternal. Much of our knowledge of Norse mythology has come to us through written sources, primarily, as mentioned, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. These two texts are considered foundational for understanding ancient Norse myths and legends. The Poetic Edda, also known as the Elder Edda, is a collection of ancient poems recorded in the 13th century, but tracing back to much earlier oral traditions. These verses recount the destinies of gods and heroes, as well as the coming Ragnarok, an apocalyptic event foreshadowing the end of the first world and the birth of a new one. It is full of riddles and metaphors that continue to spark debate among scholars. The Prose Edda, created by Snorri Sturluson, a prominent Icelandic historian and writer, serves as a kind of textbook on mythology. Its aim was not only to preserve ancient tales, but also to help poets of that era utilize mythological imagery in their works. This book presents the myths in prose, often with the author's own explanations and interpretations. But before these written texts appeared, myths were passed down orally. Oral tradition played a crucial role in Norse culture. The Vikings and their ancestors did not use writing to record their legends. There were skalds, poets and storytellers who memorized and transmitted stories from generation to generation. These masters of language not only entertained their audiences, but also fulfilled an important educational function, embedding key values like honor, bravery, loyalty, and the pursuit of glory into their works. The oral tradition gave the myths flexibility, allowing for the addition of new details or the adaptation of plots to the spirit of the times. It is thanks to this tradition that many myths have survived and reached us, even after the Christianization of Scandinavia, when pagan beliefs began to be supplanted by a new religion. Thus, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, along with oral tradition, together create a stunning mosaic of knowledge about ancient myths. These sources allow us to delve into a mysterious world where gods, giants, and mortals intertwine in an epic narrative filled with wisdom and drama. Now, let's turn to one of the most striking and significant symbols of Norse mythology, Yggdrasil. Imagine a tree so immense that its roots plunge into the abysses of the underworld, and its branches touch the very heavens. Yggdrasil is not just a tree, it is the axis of the cosmos, connecting all 9 worlds and creating invisible threads that bind all existence. The upper branches of the tree reach towards Asgard, the realm of the Aesir, the majestic gods who dwell in halls shimmering with gold. There, amidst the clouds, stands Valhalla, a vast hall where fallen warriors feast, awaiting the final battle, Ragnarok. Asgard is the embodiment of strength, wisdom, and majesty. Lower down lies Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir, gods associated with fertility, magic, and natural cycles. It is a verdant and prosperous place where nature and magic merge, and harmony with the earth is the foundation of all existence. Next is Midgard, the world of humans. Imagine lands surrounded by a boundless ocean, in which the giant serpent Jomungand eternally circles, guarding the borders of this world. Midgard is the center of events, where the destinies of gods and mortals intersect. Here, life is full of struggle, but it is in this struggle that the strength of spirit is born. Far to the east lies Jotunheim, the land of the giants. It is a harsh realm with high mountains, icy plains, and untamed nature. Giants are powerful beings, symbolizing chaos and destruction. Their presence is important for maintaining balance. Next is Alfheim, a place where magic intertwines with light. This realm is inhabited by light elves, skilled in magic, beauty, and wisdom. Their world is filled with mysterious energy, and their aid often proves decisive in the struggles of gods and mortals. In contrast, there are Nidavellir and Helheim, the subterranean realms of the dark elves, Dwerga, and dwarves. Here, in the bowels of the earth, skilled craftsmen create magical artifacts such as Thor's hammer Mjolnir or Odin's spear Gungnir. Their labor remains unseen, but it is precisely this labor that gives the gods their strength. Even further below lies Niflheim, the world of ice, fog, and eternal cold, the cradle of primordial chaos. Its chilling breath is a reminder of how fragile and precious life is. Opposite it is Muspelheim, the realm of fire, where unquenchable heat reigns. At the very bottom, near the roots of Yggdrasil, lies Helheim, the realm of the dead. Here, Hel reigns, half beautiful and half hideous. Her kingdom is quiet, gloomy, but not evil. It is a place where souls find peace, becoming part of the great cycle of life and death. All these worlds are connected by unseen paths through the roots and branches of Yggdrasil. They influence each other, creating constant movement and dynamism. This eternal interplay of order and chaos, light and darkness, makes Norse mythology truly alive and profound. And Yggdrasil remains its heart, a symbol of harmony and strength, even in the face of the coming end of the world, Ragnarok. Let us return to the beginning and learn how the world and everything around it came into being. Imagine primordial darkness, in which there is not the slightest movement. This is Ginnungagap, a bottomless chasm where neither heaven nor earth nor stars yet exist. Only from afar do the heat of Muspelheim and the cold wind of Niflheim reach. Where fire meets ice, the first drops of matter are born, from which life will soon emerge. In this boundless void, the giant Ymir arises first. He embodies untamed chaos, and from his body a whole tribe of frost-covered giants is born. However, even such a mighty being needs sustenance. It is then that the cow Audumbla appears in Ginnungagap. Milk flows endlessly from her udders, with which Ymir is nourished, while the cow herself survives by licking salty ice. And within the ice, The figure of a god named Buri gradually manifests. Buri turns out to be human-like, but endowed with divine strength. He lacks Ymir's chaotic nature. His essence is much closer to the future gods, wise and purposeful. It is Buri who becomes the progenitor of a new lineage. From him comes his son Bor, and Bor has 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. They grow up amidst the endless void, but feel a call to action. The world has been in a state of chaos for too long, and sooner or later they will have to enter into a struggle with the giants who multiply from Ymir's body. The brothers understand that as long as elements rule the world, there will be no true order. Soon, a struggle erupts between the gods and the ice giants. The very first, Ymir, becomes the primary target of the 3 brothers. The death of this giant signifies not just the overthrow of chaotic force, but the transition to universal world order. By killing Ymir, the brothers perform an act of creation. From the giant's bloody streams, oceans and rivers are born. His dense flesh forms the land, and his skeleton transforms into mountains encircling the new reality. Ymir's long hair covers the still young earth with forests and grasses, and his skull, rising to the very top, becomes the majestic vault of the sky. And so that something resembling the power of fire might shine above this vault, the gods take sparks from Muspelheim and scatter them across the sky. Thus stars appear. Thus, from the boundless abyss of Ginnunga Gap, an ordered cosmos is born. But in its depths, the memory forever remains that the world arose not from harmony, but from the clash of 2 hostile elements, from a brutal sacrifice. The primordial whisper of Ginnunga Gap lives under their celestial vault, a reminder that even in the very heart of order pulsates the very chaos without which there would be no beginning. After creating the world, the gods not only brought order to chaos, but also became its guardians. However, the cosmos is by no means a peaceful place. The 9 worlds, connected by the branches of the great Yggdrasil, are full of dangers, intrigues, and unknown mysteries. Above all these worlds rises Asgard, the home of the gods. At its center lives their leader and chief strategist, Odin. Odin is a god who not only rules, but also studies and reflects. His strength is not in brute force like Thor's, nor in cunning like Loki's. His primary strength is wisdom. An army cannot defeat an enemy without knowing its weakness. That is why the thirst for knowledge and understanding of the hidden mechanisms of the universe becomes Odin's main goal. But everything in the world comes at a price. And legend has it that Odin once heard of Mimir's wells, a spring filled with ancient wisdom. This well was located at the roots of Yggdrasil, its waters a conduit of the past, present, and future. The guardian of the well was the giant Mimir, known for his incredible insight. When Odin came to Mimir and asked to drink from the well, he was met with a condition that would seem unbearable to anyone else. Mimir demanded his eye in exchange for a sip. Odin, without hesitation, tore out his own eye and threw it into the well's waters. From that moment on, he became one-eyed, but gained what he sought, infinite knowledge. Mimir also became an important figure in his quest. Even after the giant's death, His head, preserved by magic, continued to give Odin advice. The god always carried it with him to hear wise counsel at any moment. But this sacrifice turned out to be just the first step. Along with wisdom came prophecies of the future, and Odin learned a terrible truth. One day the world would perish, and even the gods themselves would be unable to prevent it. From this moment on, he began to make his plans for the salvation of the remaining world, trying to prevent the inevitable. The thirst for knowledge drove Odin to the most dangerous places. Once he journeyed to Helheim, the gloomy world of the dead, to summon the spirit of a dead sorceress. He sought answers to questions about the future, about what the end of times would be like, and whether it could be avoided. The path to Helheim was difficult. This world was under the rule of Hel, Loki's daughter, and was surrounded by a wall of snakes and rotting flesh. To get there, Odin took the form of an old man and traversed dangerous lands inhabited by the spirits of the dead. Meeting the sorceress, he was able to hear a prophecy about Ragnarok. The sorceress told him how the world would burn in fire, how the wolf Fenrir would break its chains, how the serpent Jörmungand would rise from the depths of the ocean, and how the Aesir themselves would fall in this final battle. Odin not only strove to comprehend mysteries, but also brought knowledge to the world that had not existed before. We are talking about runes, symbols through which reality can be controlled. But the creation of runes required an incredible sacrifice. To uncover the secret of runes, Odin spent 9 days and nights hanging on the world tree Yggdrasil. Before that, he pierced himself with his own spear. Without food or water, he gazed into the abyss of the cosmos, seeking answers. Legend has it that at this moment he seemed to die and be reborn, gaining an understanding of runes. Each rune carried a special power. They were not just symbols, but tools that allowed one to influence fate. Runes could be used to invoke protection, predict the future, or even change it. These symbols became an important part of magic for both gods and humans. Odin's stories show that knowledge is the greatest power, but its price is always high. He gave an eye, shed his own blood, and even risked his life to learn more about the world. After so many sacrifices and trials undergone by Odin for the sake of wisdom and the protection of the world, it is worth looking at other key figures of the Norse pantheon, those who complement this story not only with strength but also with cunning and striking contradictions. Perhaps one of the most fascinating themes in this mythology is Thor and Loki. Thor is the embodiment of strength, decisiveness, and fearlessness. The son of Odin and the earth goddess Jörd, he inherited his father's strength, but lacks both cunning and subtlety. Thor is straightforward, like a lightning strike. He is always ready for a fight and never considers the consequences. His main weapon is the legendary hammer Mjolnir, created by the dwarf blacksmiths, the brothers Brok and Sindri. This hammer could shatter mountains, strike down giants, and return to Thor's hand no matter how far it was thrown. But to wield such power, Thor wore iron gloves and the magical belt Meginjard, which doubled his might. These attributes made him not just strong, but virtually invincible. Thor's enemies were primarily the giants, or Jotnar. Interestingly, since Thor's mother came from the lineage of Jotnar, many lands beyond Asgard belonged to the giants, and they repeatedly tried to conquer the world of the gods. But every time the threat became too close, Thor would raise Mjolnir and set off on a campaign. One of Thor's most famous exploits was his battle with the giant Hrungnir, who appeared directly in Asgard and began boasting that he would destroy the gods and take the goddess Freya. To defend Asgard's honor, Thor challenged Hrungnir to a duel. The battle took place on the borders of the worlds. Hrungnir armed himself with a giant stone shield and a whetstone, hoping they would withstand Mjolnir's blows. But only Thor's hammer flew true with a crash, and the giant himself was crushed. True, a piece of the whetstone did hit Thor's head, nearly killing him, but even wounded, he remained unyielding. Another famous story is Thor and Loki's journey to the realm of the giants, Utgard. It all began when Thor, the thunder god, the protector of Asgard, set off for distant lands beyond the familiar world. His goal was simple: to prove that no giant, no matter how cunning or strong, could rival him. Thor, as always, took Loki with him, his companion in many adventures, as well as Utgarda-Loki, a young but incredibly fast boy who later became his loyal servant. When they finally reached Utgard, Thor immediately noticed the majestic palace towering before them. It was so enormous that Thor and his companions could simply walk straight through the gates. Inside, they were met by Utgarda-Loki, the ruler of this place, whose smile hid something sinister. He recognized Thor from the first glance and, like any giant, offered Thor a chance to show what he was capable of. But everything that followed only angered Thor. When he was offered to drink from a cup, he considered it a simple test. After all, who could drink more than the god of thunder? Thor lifted the cup and took a huge gulp, then another, but the liquid level hardly decreased. For him, accustomed to victories, this was unthinkable. Then Utgarda-Loki offered another test: to lift a cat. What could be simpler? Thor approached, took it by the paws, and tried to lift it, but the cat showed no intention of moving. Thor strained his mighty muscles, his face turning red from the effort, and managed to lift only one paw off the ground. Angered and humiliated, Thor demanded another test. This time, he was offered to wrestle an old woman named Ellie. Thor rushed into battle, ready to prove his strength, but the old woman turned out to be unexpectedly strong. Thor tried with all his might to move her, but she stood as if rooted to the earth. At one point, he even found himself on one knee before her. No one could believe what was happening. This was not the Thor they knew. He had encountered something that could not be defeated by simple strength. The next day, as they prepared to leave Utgard, Utgarda-Loki revealed the truth. Each of these tests was not what it seemed. The cup was connected to the ocean, the cat to the world serpent, and the old woman to old age itself, which no one can overcome. Thor stood, clenching his hammer, ready to destroy everything around him. But Utgarda-Loki and his palace disappeared, leaving him on an empty plain. This journey served as a reminder to Thor that even strength has its limits. But he did not see it as a defeat. For Thor, it was a challenge to which he would one day respond. But perhaps Thor's most popular myth is the story of Mjolnir's theft. One day, Thor woke up and discovered that his hammer Mjolnir was missing. It wasn't just a weapon. Without it, Asgard became vulnerable to giant attacks. In panic, Thor turned to Loki, known for his sharp mind. Loki discovered that the hammer had been stolen by the giant Thrym and hidden deep in his realm. Thrym presented a brazen condition. He would return the hammer only in exchange for the hand of the goddess Freya. Of course, Freya refused, but Loki devised a cunning plan. Thor was dressed in a wedding gown and disguised as a bride. Loki, meanwhile, posed as her servant. Although Thor was furious at this humiliation, he agreed, understanding that there was no other way. When the bride arrived at Thrym's, he hosted a feast. Thor, pretending to be Freya, ate for 3, greatly surprising the giants. Loki justified this by saying, "She has been so anxious before the wedding that she hasn't eaten for several days." When Thrym decided to give Mjolnir as a wedding gift, Thor grabbed the hammer, tore off his veil, and, with fury, destroyed the giant and his entire retinue. This incident showed how Loki's cunning and Thor's strength together could solve any problem. Let's get acquainted with Loki, perhaps the most ambiguous character in all of mythology. He is the embodiment of contradictions. A Jotun by origin, but living among the gods of Asgard. He is a deceiver who sometimes saves the world and sometimes brings it to the brink of destruction. He is two-faced, charming to some, destructive to others, a catalyst for change. Yet one thing is certain: without Loki, mythology would be far less captivating. But to understand why Loki is the way he is, we need to look at his origins, his character, and his most striking deeds. Loki was born among the Jotnar, the son of Lufa, and his mother was Farbati. His very origin determined Loki's dual nature. He was connected to the world of chaos, but by no means followed the customs of his people. It was also unusual that Loki became an ally of the gods of Asgard. He was not only their companion, but also the sworn brother of Odin himself. What prompted Odin to accept Loki into Asgard? Perhaps his cunning, resourcefulness, and ability to solve complex problems, qualities that other Aesir sometimes lacked. But it was these traits, combined with his love of freedom and propensity for deception, that made Loki a figure who evoked both admiration and distrust. Loki was not just a god, he was a catalyst for events. Wherever he appeared, change always began. His shape-shifting abilities into the form of a bird, a fish, a woman, or even a horse gave him unlimited possibilities. Once, to help Odin, Loki transformed into a mare and became the mother of Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse, which he later gifted to Odin. This is Loki's nature. He could be of great benefit, but this often happened after he himself had created problems. One of the most famous stories that reveals Loki's duality is the theft of Idun. Idun is the goddess of youth, the keeper of the magical apples that granted the gods of Asgard eternal youth. Every time the Aesir gathered for a feast, Idun would bring out her apples, and with each bite, the gods would become strong and young again. But one day, Asgard lost this gift, and Loki, as always, was to blame. One day, Loki went on a journey with Odin. During their wanderings, they found themselves in starving lands where there was no food at all. Their gaze fell upon a mighty bull, and the gods decided to cook it, but no matter how hard they tried, the meat refused to cook. The reason became clear when the giant Thjazi appeared above them in the guise of an eagle. He magically stopped the fire and demanded that he be given a portion of the meat. Loki, as always, wanted to be cunning and issued a daring challenge to the giant. But he had crossed the wrong people to play such games. Thjazi seized Loki in his talons and lifted him high into the sky. In exchange for his freedom, the giant demanded that Loki help him steal Idun and her magical apples. Upon returning to Asgard, Loki devised a cunning plan. He convinced Idun to leave Asgard, saying that in the forest he had found apples even more amazing than her own, and offered to compare them. As soon as Idun stepped outside Asgard, Thjazi, in the form of an eagle, snatched her and carried her off to his realm. Without the apples, the gods began to age rapidly. Their skin became wrinkled, their strength waned, and Asgard was on the verge of destruction. When the Aesir realized what had happened, they demanded that Loki fix everything, as only he could find a way to snatch Idun from the giant's clutches. Loki, as always, got out of it. He borrowed Freya's magical falcon cloak, which allowed flight. Transforming into a falcon, he infiltrated Thjazi's realm. The giant at that moment did not expect any trickery. Loki found Idun, transformed her into a nut, and snatched her in his talons. He flew out of the giant's palace, and Thjazi, noticing the escape, rushed in pursuit. The falcon flew towards Asgard as fast as it could. The gods, noticing Loki and the giant approaching, quickly ignited a huge fire at the walls of Asgard. When Thjazi flew too close, he fell into the flames, burned his wings, and crashed to the ground. There, the Aesir ended his story, and Idun returned to Asgard, and the gods regained their youth. Loki, although he was the cause of all the troubles, once again managed to prove his worth. His agility saved Asgard, but only after he himself had brought the gods to the brink of disaster. However, Loki's chaos could not last forever. His deceptions, even the most successful ones, eventually led to the Aesir losing trust in him. Loki, accustomed to being the central figure, crossed the line when he helped the giants steal Thor's powers. But Loki continued to play his role as if he didn't notice that his days in Asgard were numbered. He is a complex figure, a hero and a traitor, a savior and a destroyer, symbolizing the very essence of myths. Loki reminds us that the world is never black and white, that every situation has multiple facets, and that change is the only constant in life. Now let's talk about how the two great powers of the world, the Aesir and the Vanir, first clashed in battle for control of the universe and then found a way to live together. They existed simultaneously, but were completely different. The Aesir, inhabitants of Asgard, embodied strength, martial valor, and order. They towered over the other worlds due to their pursuit of power. The Vanir, on the other hand, were closer to the earth. Their home was Vanahem, and they controlled the forces of fertility, magic, and nature. It seemed that each of these kindred could rule its own domain, but ambition and pride prevented them from coexisting. It all began with a goddess named Gunnlod, who came to Asgard from Vanaheim. She was quite unusual. Her body seemed to shimmer with gold, and her voice was mesmerizing. Gunnlod brought with her magical knowledge and spoke of the riches that the Aesir could obtain if they chose to cooperate with the Vanir. But her greed for gold and her blatant desire to influence the Aesir only caused irritation. The Aesir, especially Odin, considered Gunnlod a threat. They tried to get rid of her. Gunnlod was captured and burned at the stake, but rose again and again from the ashes. She came back to life 3 times, incurring the wrath of the Vanir. This became an insult equivalent to a declaration of war. When rumors of Gunnlod's death reached Vanaheim, the first skirmishes began. The Vanir considered the Aesir to have shown their arrogance and disrespect, and decided that they now needed to prove their strength. The war between the Aesir and the Vanir was unlike human battles, where armies march into combat with swords and spears. The Vanir used magic, and the earth ripped apart beneath the enemy's feet. They could make the Aesir's weapons break in their hands, and their organized ranks scatter. The Aesir, in turn, responded with their unwavering strength and military discipline. One of the most famous episodes of the war was the siege of Asgard. The Vanir destroyed its defensive walls, which the Aesir had built with great difficulty. However, Odin, Thor, and other Aesir rebuilt them again and again, repelling the attackers. It was a confrontation in which neither side could gain the upper hand. The lands of Asgard and Vanaheim were devastated, but the gods fought as if each battle could be their last. Years of war wore down both sides. The Aesir and the Vanir realized that their strengths were equal, and that continuing the fight would only lead to mutual annihilation. Odin withdrew his armies to the borders of the worlds, preparing for a decisive battle. But instead of engaging in combat, they met for negotiations. At these negotiations, the parties decided to seek a compromise. Words took the place of weapons. The Aesir and the Vanir agreed to a truce, which was to solidify peace between their kin. To seal the alliance, the Aesir and the Vanir performed a ritual. They gathered their blood in one vessel, which symbolized their union. From this liquid, the wise Quasir was created, the embodiment of knowledge and harmony between the two peoples. Quasir became a symbol of their new alliance. One of the key conditions of the peace was the exchange of hostages. Each side sent its best representatives to the other camp. The Vanir sent Njordr, Freya, and Freyr. Njordr, god of the seas, winds, and wealth, became one of the revered gods of Asgard. His children, Freya and Freyr, brought magic, fertility, prosperity, and love to Asgard. Freya also taught the Aesir the art of Seidr, magic that allowed them to predict the future and control destiny. The Aesir, in turn, sent Honir, who could not make decisions without the advice of the wise Mimir. Angered by this, the Vanir decapitated Mimir and sent his head back to Asgard. Odin, so as not to lose Mimir's knowledge, revived the head with magic. From then on, Mimir's head became Odin's advisor. The truce changed both divine kindreds. By joining forces, the Aesir and the Vanir created a more harmonious cosmos. The Vanir bestowed magical knowledge and a connection to nature upon Asgard, while the Aesir helped the Vanir master the art of warfare and strengthen their realm. But the peace between the Aesir and the Vanir was not absolute. The shadow of rivalry never completely disappeared, and sometimes it made itself known in minor conflicts. Nevertheless, the alliance between the two kindreds became one of the foundations of the cosmos. After a fragile peace was established between the Aesir and the Vanir, it seemed that balance had finally been restored. But even among gods, where each possesses strength, magic, and immortality, fate always finds its way. And one of the most tragic episodes in the history of Asgard was the death of Balder, the bright and beloved god. If in the war between the Aesir and the Vanir there were chances for negotiation, then Balder's death became a harbinger of destruction. It was not just the blow to the family of gods, but the beginning of a chain of events that led directly to Ragnarok. Let's break down how Loki's schemes caused this tragedy and why Balder's death changed everything. Balder, the son of Odin and Frigg, was one of the most beloved gods of Asgard. He was called Bright because he literally shone, filling everyone around with warmth and joy. Balder was a symbol of life, harmony, and peace, an ideal that even the gods strove to emulate. His radiance resembled the sun, and his presence brought a sense of calm. But one day, everything changed. Balder began to have dreams of his own death. These dreams were not simple nightmares, they were visions sent to him by fate itself. When he told his mother about them, she was overcome with horror. She knew that if Balder died, the balance of the world would be destroyed. Frigg, in despair of saving her son, decided to do the impossible. She went around the entire world, demanding that all creatures, plants, and objects swear that they would never harm Balder. Stones, trees, animals, diseases, and weapons, everything now seemed to make Balder invulnerable. The gods even began to have fun. They threw stones, swords, and arrows at Balder to make sure he truly could not be harmed. Everything bounced off him, except for one item that Frigg had forgotten, a small, inconspicuous mistletoe bush, which she considered too insignificant to take an oath from. Loki could not stand aside. He was angered by the love and adoration that surrounded Balder, and he saw this as an opportunity to sow chaos. Having learned from Frigg that mistletoe had remained unsworn, Loki immediately devised a plan. Taking the guise of an old woman, he approached Frigg and engaged her in conversation, learning that it was mistletoe that could kill the bright god. At another feast, where the Aesir were again throwing various objects at Balder, Loki approached the blind god Höður. He stood aside, not participating in the fun, as he could not see. Loki handed him an arrow made of mistletoe and said, "Why don't you join in?" When the mistletoe arrow struck Balder, all of Asgard froze. The god who always shone fell to the ground, his light extinguished. The gods were stunned. No one could believe it was possible. Anger and grief filled the hearts of the Aesir, and Frigg wept, unable to come to terms with a loss that showed that even they were not immortal. Balder's death is not just a tragedy. It was the beginning of the end. Balder symbolized light, hope, and order. His death meant that darkness had begun to win. It was the first step towards Ragnarok, the final battle where the world would plunge into chaos. After Baldur's death, the Aesir tried to bring him back. One of the gods journeyed to Helheim, the realm of the dead, to bring him back. But Hel, the ruler of this world, agreed to return Baldur if all beings in the world wept for him. And everyone wept. Animals, people, and trees, all except one creature, the giant Theka, who refused to shed a tear. Legend has it that this was Loki himself in a different guise. After Baldur's death, the Aesir were consumed by anger. They turned it upon Loki, accusing him of betrayal. This marked the beginning of his downfall, which culminated in his capture and punishment. However, along with this, the inexorable countdown to Ragnarok also began. Baldur's death served as a reminder that even the brightest forces cannot protect themselves from darkness if it is allowed to penetrate the world. It is a tragedy remembered not only as a harbinger of the end, but also as a symbol of the fragility of the world of gods. But until the end of times arrived, the Aesir continued to fight against threats that could harm their order. Some of these threats were associated with monsters born of chaos and Loki himself. One such creature was Fenrir, a colossal wolf whose strength even frightened the gods. And among all these battles, the heroic deeds of gods like Tyr, the god of war, stand out. Fenrir, the enormous wolf and son of Loki, grew at an astonishing rate. When he was first brought to Asgard, he was just a pup, but his power and malice already caused the gods apprehension. Having grown up in Asgard, Fenrir became increasingly dangerous, and the Aesir understood that one day he would be able to destroy everything they had built. Odin received a prophecy that Fenrir would play a key role in Ragnarok, destroying Odin himself. This forced the Aesir to seek a way to stop him before he became too strong. However, none of them dared to approach the wolf to harm him, except for one god, Tyr. Tyr was the god of war, known for his honesty and bravery. He was one of the few who could get along with Fenrir, even as the wolf became increasingly ferocious. When the Aesir decided to bind Fenrir, they created strong chains and offered the wolf a chance to test his strength by breaking them. Fenrir, confident in himself, allowed them to be put on and, as usual, broke them. Then the Aesir sought the help of dwarves, and they created magical fetters, Gleipnir, made from 6 magical components: the sound of a cat's step, a woman's beard, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. These fetters looked like a soft ribbon, but they were impossible to break. When the Aesir again invited Fenrir to test his strength, the wolf suspected deceit. He declared that he would agree only if one of the gods placed his hand in his mouth. As a sign of trust, Tyr, realizing that no one else would do it, stepped forward. He placed his hand in Fenrir's mouth while the Aesir bound the wolf. As soon as the fetters tightened and Fenrir realized he could not break free, he furiously clamped his jaws shut, biting off Tyr's hand. The loss of his hand did not stop Tyr. This act made him a symbol of sacrifice for the common good. Fenrir was bound and sent to distant lands, where he was to remain until Ragnarok itself. After Baldur's death, the world began to change. The 9 worlds, once connected by order and harmony, became engulfed in chaos. Humans stopped honoring the gods, and enmity and greed filled human hearts. Fratricide became one of the main symbols of this decline. According to prophecies, brothers would begin to kill each other, fathers would fight sons, and the world of humans would plunge into endless wars. Ragnarok would not begin in Asgard, but among mortals, whose actions would affect everything. Loki, the main culprit of the tragedy, was caught and punished, but his malice only intensified. Chained to a rock in a cave, he plotted with his sons, knowing that his children, Fenrir and Jormungandr, would also play their part. Each of these events carried deep symbolism. Baldur's death, fratricide, and the moral decay of humans showed that the world had reached its tipping point. It was a sign that the gods, who had tried to maintain order for centuries, could no longer contain the chaos. When the sun no longer shines and people lose faith in the gods, darkness descends. The gods understood that Asgard's days were numbered, but they still tried to hold the cosmos back from complete destruction. Every omen, from Baldur's death to the decline of morals, led to one thing: the end, but also the beginning of a new world. The gods knew that their fate was sealed, but even in the face of annihilation, they prepared to give their last battle. Asgard was overcome by anxious anticipation. The gods, usually proud and unyielding, now felt the breath of the inevitable end. Their hearts ached with premonition. The earth cracked, icy winds carried threats, and the ocean waves began to rise higher. Too many omens converged into one. Ragnarok was no longer a prophecy, it was becoming a reality. Loki, chained to a rock in the depths of a cave, endured torments that the Aesir considered eternal. Poison dripping onto his face caused such pain that his screams shook the rocks. But the chains holding him began to break the stones. His fetters weakened. He broke free, greedily inhaling the air filled with the premonition of chaos. Now Loki no longer hid. His place was on the front lines of the coming destruction. Having broken free, he headed for Jotunheim, where the ice giants were already waiting for him. Hram, the giant Thor had defeated, and Hel, the ruler of the underworld, also joined the army of chaos. Loki and Hram formed an alliance that was meant to destroy everything the Aesir had built. And in the south, in fiery Muspelheim, Surt was already drawing his flaming sword, leading his fire demons to destruction. Meanwhile, from the depths of the ocean, Jormungandr, the world serpent, began to rise from Bifrost. His appearance was a disaster for all living things. And in Helheim, Hell's gates swung open, releasing her subjects. The dead, whose eyes burned with emptiness, silently emerged onto the lands to join Loki's army. Asgard, standing at the apex of the worlds, observed this unrest. The gods saw the forces of chaos gathering from all sides. Odin, always confident in his wisdom, sent his ravens to gather the latest news from the worlds. The ravens returned with grim tidings. The armies of giants, the dead, and demons were already moving towards Asgard. But the Aesir did not flinch. Odin stood on his throne and surveyed his brethren. He knew this would be their last battle. Each of them had their role, and no one intended to retreat. Thor, holding Mjolnir, was ready to face Jormungandr. His resolve was unbreakable, just like the lightning that flashed in his gaze. Tyr, who had lost his hand in a skirmish with Fenrir, sharpened his sword, understanding that his life would now be given for victory. Freya gathered the magic of the Vanir, preparing to use it to give Asgard even a small chance. On the Bifrost Bridge, connecting Asgard to the rest of the worlds, stood Heimdall, the horn whose sound would herald the beginning of the battle. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the first lights of Surtur's army were already visible. The fire demons began to thunder across the Rainbow Bridge. Heimdall raised his horn. The piercing sound of Jalahorn carried across all worlds, announcing that Ragnarok had begun. Asgard trembled. The gods raised their weapons, their battle cry echoing through the halls. This was their final battle. They knew they could not stop the end, but each of them was ready to give their life so that a new world could be born from the ashes of the old. And as the enemies approached the gates of Asgard, the gods stepped forward to meet the chaos. The first to enter the battlefield was Odin, the supreme god, spear in hand. He towered over the hill, his gaze fixed on Fenrir. The wolf, having broken free from its chains, was now free. The wolf, puffing out its chest and opening its jaws, made the earth tremble. Odin did not flinch. He knew this battle would be his last, but he would meet his fate fully armed. Both lunged at each other. Odin hurled his spear with lightning speed, which shone with magical light. Fenrir slammed into it, but did not stop. The wolf rose on its hind legs and leaped. The beast's jaws closed, and Odin disappeared. It was a moment that made time stand still. The supreme god of Asgard, the symbol of wisdom and strength, fell, swallowed by chaos. But his death was not in vain. It was a signal for the other gods. It was time to fight to the last. On the other side of the battlefield, Thor faced his arch-enemy, the world serpent Jormungandr. The serpent rose above the earth, its body writhing in the sky, and poisonous vapor spewed from its mouth, poisoning everything around. The ocean waves carried its poison throughout the world, destroying trees, houses, and life. Lightning flashed around Thor as if nature itself obeyed his will. With a thunderous roar, he hurled his hammer, which struck the serpent's head with terrifying force. Jormungand hissed, its body contorted, and water erupted into the air in huge fountains. The serpent raised its head and struck with its tail, shaking the earth. Thor barely stayed on his feet, but his rage was boundless. He charged forward with a strength that could only be born from the realization of the inevitable end. Mjolnir struck again and again, expelling the last drops of poison. But this was not a victory. Thor took only 9 steps, felt the poison penetrate his body, fell to his knees, his breath grew heavy, and the hammer slipped from his hand. The god of thunder perished, but his sacrifice saved the world from poisonous chaos. Loki, the leader of the army of chaos, finally met Heimdall, the protector of Asgard. Their eyes met on the battlefield, filled with fire, blood, and shadows. Loki smiled, his eyes burning with a thirst for revenge. Heimdall, with the Gjallarhorn in one hand and a sword in the other, stood like an unyielding wall. Without further ado, they lunged at each other. Loki, quick and cunning, dodged the blows. Heimdall, however, his dagger flashed in the air, leaving deep wounds on the Guardian's armor. The blows were precise, and his strength was unwavering. The fight was desperate. Loki used all his tricks, transforming into shadows, deflecting blows, but Heimdall fought as the embodiment of order. Finally, both inflicted mortal wounds on each other. Their bodies collapsed simultaneously, and their blood mixed with the dirt beneath their feet. Both fell, and their battle remained a draw. Amidst this chaos, as gods and monsters perished one by one, the branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree, trembled. Its roots, soaked in Jörmungand's poison, began to wither. Surtur, the fire giant, raised his flaming sword and aimed it at the tree. A huge flame engulfed its branches, spreading to all the worlds. Along with the flames, the bridges also burned. Bifrost cracked and collapsed, consumed by fire. Stars fell from the sky, and the earth cracked, plunging all living things into the abyss. This was the end. Ragnarok was complete. The gods fell, the worlds were destroyed. But from the ashes of the old world, a new one began to grow. It was the end of an era, but not the end of everything. And although the Aesir fell, they left behind the knowledge that even in chaos there is room for rebirth. The flames subsided. The earth, torn apart by war, still breathed smoke. But the roar of battle no longer sounded in the heavens. The waves, stirred by Jörmungand's fury, gradually calmed, and the poisoned air slowly cleared. The winds no longer carried the smell of burning, and the shadows of the burned worlds began to dissipate. Not all gods perished in battle. Amidst the fire and chaos, there were those whom fate allowed to see a new dawn. Thor's 2 sons, Magni and Modi, survived Ragnarok. They were still young, but their strength was great. They found Mjolnir, the hammer that their father held in his hands in his final moments. This hammer now belonged to them, as Thor's legacy, a symbol of protection and thunder. In the world of gods, Vidar and Vali survived. Vidar, Odin's son, was known for his silent strength. It was he who avenged his father's death by tearing Fenrir's jaws apart. He remained standing amidst the ruins, unbroken, ready to rebuild Asgard. Vali, another son of Odin, also survived. He was the one born for revenge for Balder, but now a different destiny awaited him: to create a new world. But perhaps the most surprising was the return of Balder himself. His spirit did not vanish. He did not remain forever in the cold halls of Helheim. When the battle ended, when all 9 worlds shuddered in their final breath, Balder returned from the realm of the dead. Now Balder, once fallen by Loki's schemes, was to become the new ruler of the reborn world. But what about humans? Weren't they also part of this story? Hidden deep in the roots of Yggdrasil, two humans named Leif and Leifthrisir survived. They were untouched by Surt's fire. They gave rise to a new humanity that would once again fill the world. The ash settled. The sun, once hidden behind clouds of smoke and poison, rose again in the sky. It was a new sun, the daughter of the old star who died during the battle. Now her light touched the earth, reviving it. Where waves and flames had once raged, grass began to sprout again. The forest, burned in Surt's fire, began to regrow. The streams, poisoned by the serpent, became pure. Even the very air, which was heavy with ash, became light and fresh. In place of Asgard, there was now only wasteland. The halls of Odin, Thor, Frigg, and all the other gods had turned into ruins. But on the horizon, a new Asgard was already appearing. It was more modest, quieter, but not bound by such power as the former world. The world was being born anew. Balder, returned from the realm of the dead, was now ready to become the ruler of this new world. He looked at his brethren and knew that together they would build something new, something better than what had been before. In this new world, there was no place for Loki's chaos, for Odin's unrestrained thirst for power, for Thor's destructive storms. It was a world where order and nature existed in harmony. But at its very foundation, there remained a trace of the past, a memory of Ragnarok, of the fact that even gods are not eternal. The new world was better, but it knew that one day the end could come again. The sun shone, and leaves grew on the branches. Life had a chance. That was the most important thing. The stories of gods, heroes, and prophecies did not disappear with the arrival of the new era. Even after the fall of Asgard, their images continue to live on. The myths that the ancient skalds told around the fire have moved into books, films, games, becoming an integral part of modern culture. Today, Thor, Odin, or Loki are known even by those who have never opened the old sagas. They have moved into comics, become characters in films and series. Of course, their images are often changed, adapted to the new era, but the essence remains the same. Thor remains a symbol of strength, a protector. Loki of cunning and unpredictability. Odin of wisdom and strategy. Their stories are woven into modern narratives, showing that they are eternal. In video games like God of War, mythology comes alive, allowing players to confront gods and monsters themselves. In literature, from Neil Gaiman's novels to Percy Jackson, ancient gods are given new life. And in cinema, their stories are retold again and again, sometimes distorted, but still recognizable. For many, these stories are not just tales of the past. They shaped their attitude towards life. The Vikings did not fear death because they knew that if they fell with a sword in their hands, they would go to Valhalla. They believed that even if Ragnarok arrived, one had to fight to the end. This spirit, this philosophy lives on. It manifests in codes of honor, in military tactics, in art. Today, people accept the inevitability of change. Myths are not just stories of the past. They shape the present And perhaps that is why Norse mythology continues to inspire millions of people around the world. But it was not only the gods who left their mark on history. Among humans, there were also those whose names became part of the great epic. And one of the most famous heroes, standing on the border between reality and myth, was Ragnar Lothbrok. Let's finally get acquainted with his story. He was a human, but his name sounded as if he himself had emerged from myth. His exploits were so great that even centuries later, it is impossible to say where the story ends and the legend begins. He was a pirate, a conqueror, a ruler, the husband of powerful wives, the father of renowned sons. His life is a bridge between the world of legends and the world of reality, and his death became so symbolic that it is hard to believe it could have been just a coincidence. Skalds sang that he was a descendant of Odin. Perhaps it was just a beautiful metaphor, but his fate itself resembled the course of a mythological hero. He was a king who lived in a time when the world was changing. He knew no peace. His sword always sought a new battle. His ships, new lands. Lothbrok is not a surname, but a nickname meaning hairy breeches. Legends say he wore unusual leather trousers treated with tar to protect himself from snake bites. But perhaps it was just an attempt to stand out. A name that has slipped from century to century. He became famous for his raids on France, England, and Ireland. No one could feel safe if his drakars appeared on the horizon. His most famous campaigns are associated with Paris and England, where his fate was sealed. Legends say that Ragnar sailed to the shores of Northumbria. He fell into the hands of King Ella, who devised a mythical execution. It is said that when Ella ordered Ragnar to be thrown into a pit full of snakes, the Viking did not flinch. He did not beg for mercy or call for his relatives. Instead, he only said, "Like pigs, my sons will squeal when they learn how I am suffering." This was not just a threat, it was a prophecy, and it came true. When Ragnar's sons learned of his death, they did not just go to seek revenge. They unleashed such wrath upon England that even centuries later it was remembered. They gathered the great heathen army and devastated Northumbria, subjecting it to terrible retribution. And with this, our lecture comes to an end. We have embarked on a journey through time, from the mythical beginning of the world and the great gods of Asgard to legendary Vikings like Ragnar Lothbrok. We have seen how the world was born and how it fell during Ragnarok, how myths shaped people's worldview, and how they continue to live in our culture today. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope this lecture was interesting for you, and perhaps even inspired you to look at ancient legends in a new light. Until next time, and may the gods always be gracious to you.